Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. So we're studying Swami Vivekananda's remarkable Jnana Yoga, and we're on chapter 8, which is titled Realization. And I'm going to start back just one sentence. This Atman in all beings does not manifest himself to the eyes or the senses, but those whose minds have become purified and refined realize him. The reason I started back is so that we could talk a little bit about what's meant by purified and refined. If we were to experience, it's the difference between the sun and the moon. Our ordinary awareness as we start our spiritual journey, our ordinary awareness, and then as it becomes more and more refined and so on, sees more and more clearly the reflection. The reflection. This is why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that the mirror of the heart may be wiped clean. When the mirror of the heart is wiped clean, there is a perfect reflection of what is being referred to here as the Atman, the divine presence, Brahman, Satchidananda. This is Savikalpa Samadhi. It's still an experience, it's a reflection. That nervous system that we bring even to this point, even to that point of Savikalpa Samadhi, would not be able to withstand the full sunlight, that which is being reflected by the moon. It must become further purified and refined, and this is discussed in detail, by the way, in two contexts. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the process of purification and refinement, and by Adi Shankaracharya's workbook, the Viveka Chudamani. So when the Swami says, this Atman in all beings does not manifest himself to the eyes or the senses, in other words, within time, space, and causation, but those whose minds have become purified and refined realize him. And Patanjali puts it this way. He says there are 8 limbs of yoga. The first 6 involve self-effort. The self-effort is for this purification and refinement of your chitta, your mind stuff, which is actually throughout your body. It's not just in the head or just in the head and the heart. It's actually in every cell of your body. So before we go on, are there any comments or questions about this process of refinement? What is meant by it? Whatever might arise or occur to you about this.
I think you mean that our ego has to be just lower level of truth to higher level of truth, and ego needs to perfect, mature, right, Brother Shankara? In order to have
It becomes ripe.
it becomes right. That's what I mean.
And so this is Sri Ramakrishna's word.
Yes.
It becomes a ripe ego. But there's nothing wrong with having an ego. As a matter of fact, as Swami Ranganathananda points out in his book, Divine Grace, it's absolutely critically important to have a healthy, sane ego in order to make the progress necessary to get to the point where you can begin to understand spirituality. Because as long as you're constantly struggling with the world, there's no possibility of really reaching these higher realms.
Sure.
The struggling allows us to still we can there's much progress that can be made and struggle at the same time. But anyway.
Sure, you mean the ripened ego. We have
The ripe ego.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Brother Shankar.
But it actually goes beyond that, as Sri Ramakrishna says. Ripe ego retires and becomes, as he says, as a shy child. And so that aspect of the mind is no longer at the forefront. Thank you, Haima. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
So I've also heard it described where it says that our self effort is towards chiseling away at the what is not, and then the Atman declares itself, which is the grace.
That's that is the sculptor metaphor. Yes, indeed. We chisel away that which is not
Right.
the Atman.
Right. And when we engage in the world, for I mean the way my words are coming out right now, is and watch our thoughts. Um, we are engaging with either the past or the future. I mean, it's so clear that every thought is either about the past or the future, and it's such a struggle to disengage. It happens, but then again, it engages.
Yes.
That's why, again, it's so important, I think, these satsangs. Otherwise, for me at least, it's to keep that, keep going and keep getting that
Yes.
fuel.
Every thought is, and the reason for that is, our thoughts are based on our samskaras, our mental impressions, our recognition of name and form. And so touched upon by the gunas in their constant play and interplay, they give rise to these thoughts. But there's another kind of awareness that arises as we observe these thoughts. And this is the witness awareness, which is not a thought. It may also give birth to some thoughts because that's what the mind does. But as we become aware of the witness presence, there's a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, and we struggle to make some sense of it. So our mind thinks thoughts, which is its job. There's no reason to complain about it. It's our coping mechanism, but unfortunately, we've allowed our coping mechanism to become too much in the forefront, too dominant. And so it becomes this, as Haima pointed to, this unripe ego. Thank you, Swayam. You're absolutely right. Anyone else? Anything?
Thank you, Brother Shankar.
Brother Shankar, I have a question to what Swayamji asked. So if mind is creating its thought, and then there's something that takes a decision based on that thought, that I want to engage in it or not engage in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is an experiencer. So is the experiencer one who is deciding, or there is something in between? That's what is deciding. And then that gives the experience on, okay, when I engage in it.
As long as you think of yourself as an individual separate being, your ego self, assisted as you progress in spiritual life by your buddhi and the witness self, will be the decider. But when you come face to face with the truth that you are not a separate being, and furthermore, you are not the doer, as Sri Krishna points out so very explicitly in chapters 3 and 4 of the Gita, that you are not the doer. It is the gunas that are the doing, and the gunas are the instruments of the divine, of the Atman. So that is what is deciding, though it seems to us when we are the separate, when we have this sense of being a separate being, an individual, that we are deciding.
Okay. So at this time, I'm training my buddhi to engage and or disengage in the thoughts which don't add any value. Is that
You don't train your buddhi.
okay?
You become aware of your buddhi. And that is done only through introspection. Most people, as Swami Yatishwarananda was Swami Yogeshananda's guru. As Swami Yatishwarananda pointed out, most people never come into conscious awareness of the buddhi. We experience it as a child when there's purity of the mind. We experience it, and it's referred to oftentimes as our conscience. Our conscience is telling us the right thing to do. We don't have to think about it. Our conscience tells us. As we grow up, we are trained to ignore our conscience because it's not practical. And of course, in this modern world, in many ways, it's not. We have to learn to lie, to dissimulate, to be calculating in order to succeed in the world. At least we think we do. Because we're taught to think that way. We get our membership in society by learning to ignore the buddhi. So through introspection, prayer, contemplation, concentration, and the practice of meditation, we begin to be aware of the buddhi, and once again, we have this strong sense of what is auspicious to do and what is inauspicious to do we don't have to think about it, calculate about it. The buddhi makes us aware. Thank you, Somesh. That was a good segue.
Thank you.
Mhm. Anything else from anyone about this business?
Brother Shankara,
Yeah.
a question
Yes, Neera.
about the buddhi. When you said that, does that mean we become more and more spontaneous?
Yes, one of the hallmarks of a yogi is spontaneity, fluidity.
Mhm.
They don't have to think about what to do. They simply know. This is described in some detail in Swami Prabhavananda's book, How to Know God.
So also we become more like childlike, because children are much more spontaneous
Yes,
than the adults.
as Sri Ramakrishna says, you become like a 5-year-old child that is not within the control of the gunas. The buddhi is not within the control of the gunas. The buddhi is, so to speak, superior to the gunas. But that's very hard to understand. And so there's a lot of thinking and calculation that goes on as a general rule for most of us about
That,
weighing what's the right thing to do.
that leads me to think about how our thoughts, words, and actions should be aligned. You know, the spontaneity makes it.
Oh, absolutely, dear. That is what Sri Ramakrishna says. When this happens, you're almost there. When your thoughts, speech, and actions are all aligned, particularly when they're aligned with the aspiration for God realization, you're almost there. Very good point, Nira.
Returning to the subject of the conscience, I've certainly met people who have no conscience and there's no moral boundary they can't cross. But I think for the vast majority of society, we do have a conscience, and that's what allows society to function, because we know kind of what's right and wrong. There's certain moral boundaries like the vast majority of people would not cross.
As Vivekananda pointed out earlier in this talk, it's not conscience. It's not their buddhi. It's it's the moral rules of society. And the reason that people don't cross them is because of fear of punishment.
Oh,
That's what Vivekananda asserted, and it certainly does make sense. He said if there weren't those rules, we'd there would be chaos. Most people would be. So society makes its rules, and they are moral rules. They're based on the speaking and the writing of people who did have access to their buddhi, like Jesus Christ, for example. I mean, when he said, I have overcome the world, he meant that he no longer was in any way concerned with what the world had to say. He knew whereof to be and do and say, because he was one with that which is one face of it is the buddhi, which means the awakened self. That's what the buddhi means. As children, we have this conscience. We don't need the rules of society to tell us what to do. We know. But we are very soon trained out of it. By the time we're 5 or 6 or 7 years old, certainly by the time we're 10 years old, we've learned how to live out our shadow side as well as our bright side. Anything else from anyone? This is excellent. This is exactly what we should be doing so that we understand what it means when the Swami said, those whose minds have become purified and refined.
In fact, Brother Shankara, I was thinking that in the Hindu scriptures, they talk about Manu's code of living, for moral and ethical codes of living.
Yes.
And the whole scripture is about that. Yeah.
Well, the Vedas are
Vedas, yes.
the karma kanda of the Vedas is about that. And it's
Yes.
because people need that, because most people are not in contact with that which would make it unnecessary, which is why it's said of the saints that they're beyond right and wrong. They have no need of anyone to tell them what's right and wrong. It becomes actually a cage, that kind of conversation. Thank you, Nira. That's right. That's what
That reminds me the recent example of, the mask and the non-mask division in the society that happened. And people who didn't want to wear a mask, they thought it was freedom,
Yes, when in fact it was license. It's not freedom. Thank you, Nira. That's right. Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, Brother Shankara, Anshu here. Hi, how are you doing?
Good.
So I've been struggling with this idea of purification because I've, I find that there are times when my mind is pure and or purer, more pure, and there are times when it's very clouded and struggling to understand and make sense of things. So how do you go about trying to attain this pure mind? Or what does Vivekananda say about that?
Well, Vivekananda has told us in this talk, you do this by a combination of prayer, contemplation, concentration, and the practice of meditation. And he's going to go even more into that as he ends this talk, how to achieve realization. But it's simply it's not an easy thing to do. It's going to be compared in a few sentences to walking on the razor's edge. Walking on a razor's edge.
Right.
Now, you're not walking on a razor's edge barefoot. You're shod by the spiritual practice that you have, so you're not walking barefoot on a razor. And you have your spiritual practice as a balance pool. And what you find is that walking on this razor's edge, if you fall off, which we do constantly, it's not very far down. And there isn't any punishment. We're taught in this society to fear punishment, to fear God as a punisher, to fear society as a punisher. But this intensely interior private adventure of walking on the razor's edge, you have your spiritual practice as your balance pole. Just imagine a tightrope walker. They have a long pole that they hold, and that's what helps them stay in balance. Our spiritual practice is our long balance pole. So this constant struggle to keep the mind under control, it goes on for decades. If we can remember Sri Ramakrishna's teacher of Advaita, Totapuri. It took him 40 years. 40 years. So one of the traps is being impatient. Impatience is just another form of distraction. It just unsettles the mind and unclarifies the situation because we think it should happen faster, it should happen faster. No, it's going to happen just as fast as it will. And we just have to keep walking forward with the balance pole of our daily spiritual practice and not recriminate with ourselves at all when we fall off the razor's edge. As Vivekananda says, we fall 1,000 times, we rise 1,001 times.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
You bet, Anshu. Anybody else? Okay, this has been just exactly what a class is about. This is how we do this together. So I'll repeat what the Swami said. This Atman in all beings does not manifest itself to the eyes or the senses, but those whose minds have become purified and refined realize the Atman. Beyond all sound, all sight, beyond form, absolute, beyond all taste and touch, infinite, without beginning and without end, even beyond nature, the unchangeable. He who realizes that frees himself from the jaws of death. But it is very difficult. It is, as it were, walking on the edge of a razor. The way is long and perilous. But struggle on, do not despair. Awake, arise, and stop not till the goal is reached. So listen to this catalog. This is one of the things that we find in the Upanishads and in the Gita and so on. This catalog, which is trying to convince us that it really is beyond all time, space, and causation. Beyond all sound, all sight, beyond form, absolute, beyond all taste and touch, infinite, without beginning and without end, even beyond nature, the unchangeable. He who realizes that frees himself from the jaws of death. In other words, is not compelled to take rebirth in human form. He who realizes that frees himself from the jaws of death. But it is very difficult. It is, as it were, walking on the edge of a razor. The way is long and perilous. But struggle on, do not despair. Awake, arise, and stop not till the goal is reached. The one central idea throughout all the Upanishads is that of realization. A great many questions will arise from time to time, and especially to the modern mind. There will be the question of unity. Of utility. There will be the question of utility. There will be various other questions. But in all, we shall find that we are not prompted by our past associations. It is association of ideas that has such a tremendous power over our minds. To those who from childhood have always heard of a personal God and the personality of the mind, these ideas will of course appear very stern and harsh. But if they listen to them and think over them, they will become part of their lives and will no longer frighten them. The great question that generally arises is the utility of philosophy. To that, there can be only one answer. If, on the utilitarian ground, it is good for men to seek for pleasure, why should not those whose pleasure is in religious speculation seek for that? Because sense enjoyments please many, they seek for them. But there may be others whom they do not please, the sense enjoyments. But there may be others whom they do not please, who want higher enjoyment. The dog's pleasure is only in eating and drinking. The dog cannot understand the pleasure of the scientist who gives up everything and perhaps dwells on the top of a mountain to observe the position of certain stars. The dogs may smile at him and think he is a madman. Perhaps this poor scientist never had money enough to marry even and lives very simply. Maybe the dog laughs at him, but the scientist says, "My dear dog, your pleasure is only in the senses which you enjoy, and you know nothing beyond. But for me, this is the most enjoyable life. And if you have the right to seek your pleasure in your own way, so have I in mine." The mistake is that we want to tie the whole world down to our own plane of thought and to make our mind the measure of the whole universe. To you, the old sense things are perhaps the greatest pleasure, but it is not necessary that my pleasure should be the same. And when you insist upon that, I differ from you. That is the difference between the worldly utilitarian and the religious man. The first man says, "See how happy I am. I get money, but do not bother my head about religion. It is too unsearchable, and I am happy without it." So far, so good. Good for all utilitarians. But this world is terrible. It is. If a man gets happiness in any way, excepting by injuring his fellow beings, Godspeed him. But when this man comes to me and says, "You too must do these things. You will be a fool if you do not," I say, "You are wrong, because the very things which are pleasurable to you have not the slightest attraction for me. If I had to go after a few handfuls of gold, my life would not be worth living. I should die." That is the answer the religious man would make. The fact is that religion is possible only for those who have finished with these lower things. We must have our own experiences, must have our own full run. It is only when we have finished this run that the other world opens. The enjoyments of the senses sometimes assume another phase, which is dangerous and tempting. You will always hear the idea in very old times, in every religion, that a time will come when all the miseries of life will cease and only its joys and pleasures will remain, and this earth will become a heaven. That I do not believe. This earth will always remain the same world. It is the most terrible thing to say. Yes, I do not see any way out of. I do not see any way out of. There seems to be a typo.
It says, I do not see any way out of it. Do not see my way out of it.
Right, okay. I do not see any way out of it. There's the word here as it appears as item. I do not see any way out of it.
Yeah.
The misery in the world is like chronic rheumatism in the body. Drive it from one part and it goes to another. Drive it from there and you will feel it somewhere else. Whatever you do, it is still there. In olden times, people lived in the forests and ate each other. In modern times, they do not eat each other's flesh, but they cheat one another. Whole countries and cities are ruined by cheating. That does not show much progress. I do not see what you call progress in this world is other than the multiplication of desires. If one thing is obvious to me, it is this. It is this, that desires will bring misery. It is the state of the beggar who is always begging for something and unable to see anything without the wish to possess it. It is always longing for more. If the power to satisfy our desires is increased in arithmetical progression, the power of desire is increased in geometrical progression. The sum total of happiness and misery in this world is at least the same throughout. If a wave rises in the ocean, it makes a hollow somewhere. If happiness comes to one man, unhappiness comes to another, or perhaps to some animal. Men are increasing in numbers, and some animals are decreasing. We are killing them off and taking their land. We are taking all means of sustenance from them. How can we say then that happiness is increasing? The strong race eats up the weaker. But do you think that the strong race will be very happy? No, they will begin to kill each other. I do not see, on practical grounds, how this world can become a heaven. Facts are against it. I think that's enough of that for us to stop and discuss it a little. Any comments or questions about what the Swami has said? I mean, this is very forceful, what he's saying.
Yes. So here, like at the beginning, they talk about higher enjoyment. So, that's the first question comes to my mind, that by doing this, do we actually attain a higher enjoyment, or maybe, it is it's the same as, getting more money or getting more,
No, it's qualitatively different, Sumesh. It is, and the only way to know that is to do it. It's as the Swami says, the only way to learn chemistry is to go into the lab and do the experiments. You cannot do it by reading the book. You cannot learn chemistry by reading the book or by saying chemistry, chemistry, chemistry. You must go into the lab and do the experience, do the experiments. Then you see that if you take a Bunsen burner and you put a beaker on, and you light the Bunsen burner and you put in this solution and this solution, and you mix them together, and then you put in a reagent, suddenly the beaker that was full of liquid is now in an instant, so fast your eyes cannot see it happen, In an instant, it's full of crystals. It's no one would believe you if you told them that would happen. No one who didn't know anything about chemistry would believe you if they told them that would happen.
Yep.
The same thing is true of spiritual life. No one can convince you of this higher enjoyment and this other way of being. You have to discover it. You have to uncover it for yourself. And it is a long, slow process, but it is well worth the effort, is the testimony of the great teachers. It is the testimony of the saints. And what you discover, what you uncover, has many names as God or Goddess, but it also has names simply as simple as love or truth. But there's such satisfaction in that when you do discover it in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
I think the spiritual journey becomes more joyous when I accept that if the Atman is not declaring itself, then I'm not ready for it, because um, most of the like Arjuna, and when they saw the, the the whole form, it was so overwhelming that Arjuna actually closed his eyes. So I feel like rather than focusing on the end result, that for which I may not be ready, to enjoy the journey and have that faith in the sages and the other realized people, that when the time is right, it'll come, and
Yes.
that makes it more, I think, more enjoyable actually.
Actually, you're absolutely right, dear. And if we begin to see this as an adventure, a spiritual journey that is an adventure, what is an adventure? An adventure has wonderful things that happen and not so wonderful things that happen. We stumble and fall and skin our knees and bloody our nose. We have other times when it seems as if if you read the wonderful book, The Wizard of Oz, and you see Dorothy, who is every person, and you mentioned Arjuna. So Sri Krishna says, though your mind is not really ready for this, I will give you divine sight so that you can see. And Arjuna experiences it for a time, and as you said, he can't stand it. He says, "Oh, Krishna, resume your familiar form. Please resume your familiar form." As my friend and teacher. It will happen when we're ready for it, is what the teachers tell us over and over. But what the great teachers say is make that spiritual effort your first priority, and remarkable things begin to happen. Christ said it this way so simply: seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you. Well, that doesn't come like winning the lottery all at once. It, things change for you little by little, better and better. But what is the prime directive? Make finding the kingdom within yourself Seek ye first the kingdom of God, which is defined as within you. Make that your first priority. Now, it's very hard to do that and live a busy worldly life, which is exactly why Sri Krishna gives us such explicit instructions in chapters 3 and 4 of the Gita on how to live a busy life and detach yourself from the actions and their results. And so you continue to do as you did before, but it's transformed because you no longer see it as your own, as the possession of your individual separate ego self. There's great magic. There's great magic, and I mean that word so emphatically. There's great magic in these instructions by the great ones. Offer every moment to me, Sri Krishna says. Your every action and its fruits, and be free. This is karma yoga, and it is a great prescription for the active person in the world. Anything else, dears?
The Swami says you will always hear the idea that in the old times there will be a time when all pleasures will remain. This earth will become a heaven. That I do not believe. This world will always remain the same world. And then he goes on to explain how it just remains a mix of good and evil.
Yes, exactly.
And that
Because it
seems
cannot be otherwise. That's what he defined so carefully, as he defined Maya for us in the first few chapters of Jnana Yoga. If you remember, he very carefully defined every aspect of time, space, and causation as Maya, which is essentially empty. It may have it may give us some transitory happiness. It may give us even a whole lifetime of ease and pleasure.
well, that's certainly the exception. Few people have that.
Well, yeah, few people, but some do.
Some do. Yeah.
But I think, Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
I was thinking that to me it sounded like a little pessimistic view when Swamiji says about there will always be misery in this world.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, but I got to admit he's right. I mean, look at the world today. There's still a lot of
It's
misery.
very pessimistic. Where is the flip side of it? Like, where is our hope and optimism?
Our hope is to seek within, dear. If we keep looking in the world for our happiness and our pleasure, no matter how we define it, no matter as long as it is we are looking within time, space, and causation, among the things of the senses, we have these 5 organs of perception, the senses, and the 5 organs of action. This is our action and experience suit. It's created so that we can experience this. We want to, there's no question. But if we get trapped there by trying and trying and trying to get real fulfillment, real happiness, real freedom, then it's, as Swami Chaitananda says so sweetly, he says, oh, hopeless condition. Hopeless condition. So there will always be the misery of the world, simply because it is the nature of Maya. It is dark and bright. The three gunas, which are that which of which everything is compounded, they have no inherent brightness that will overcome all darkness. They have both. This is why all three, even sattva, is called a robber, because even sattva can lead to a false sense of contentment and are stopping, are living in a kind of bliss and stopping, and not going on until the goal is reached.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
So Swami Tyagananda explains this suffering, sorrow in this way. First of all, he mentions how both Buddha and Krishna refer to the world as joyless and an abode of sorrow. I'm kind of reading the book as I'm paraphrasing. And then he describes that there are two kinds of sorrow, temporal and existential. So temporal is our ups and downs of, I guess, everyday daily life. And so there'll be moments of sorrow and moments of joy. And yes, if we, in that regard, we cannot say that the world is, always suffering. But the existential sorrow, connected with our very existence as human beings, no human being is exempt from it. And I think what he talks about existential sorrow is the suffering associated with the process of aging, illness, and death.
And our sense of separation.
Right. And the inherent in mental stress, anxiety, and fear. So he says people are so preoccupied in dealing with temporal sorrow and in running after temporal joy that there is little time or interest in dealing with existential sorrow.
Yes, which is the only solution for the existential sorrow, is this introspection that leads us to the deeper levels of ourselves that are beyond our sense of separate self. And so, yes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Swami. Yes, there are the two kinds.
Brother Shankara, here's another thing that it says. The fact is that religion is possible only for those who have finished with these lower things. We must have our own experiences, must have our full run. It's only when we have finished this run that the other world opens. So, is it like during the journey we get this feeling that we have finished with the we had the full run, or it is we have to have
Yes,
that? Okay.
Yes, Somesh, exactly. It is as we begin the journey, there's this little flame of yearning within us for greater happiness, greater freedom, fulfillment. We look around, where will I find this? I've come to the conclusion that the world as I've known it is not going to do it for me all by itself. I may not be fully finished with it, but I understand that there's more. So that more becomes more and more. as that more becomes more and more, the world becomes less and less. Until finally you see, and if you want to read a beautiful poetic evocation and description of this, read the last few pages of Swami Vivekananda's book, Raja Yoga. He, I don't remember whether Swami Prabhavananda quotes that passage in How to Know God or not. But in any event, it's there in the last few pages. We do this because we want to. We live this life as a human being because we want to. But the thing that the Swami points out to us by indirection is that we've tricked ourselves into it. It isn't that someone pulled the wool over our eyes. We pulled the wool over our own eyes so that we could do this. In the Chandogya Upanishad, it says, I am one, I shall become many. Now, the one never stops being the one, but now there is the dream of manyness. And the reason it is so compelling and so convincing and so entangling is that it is Brahman's dream. But Brahman isn't other than us. We are that. We are that. It is us who is dreaming this. As Vivekananda so sweetly and wonderfully put it, we are infinite dreamers, dreaming finite dreams. And we've done it because for reasons that are absolutely inscrutable to the finite mind. Why this happened? Why, as Swami Vivekananda said in an earlier talk in Jnana Yoga, it's a question that cannot even be logically asked. Because that which is has no beginning, has no end. And so by that logic, there is no middle either. So there just is what is as we sit here.
Mhm.
Thank you, Sumesh. Anything else from anyone? Okay, it's 8:59. Any final thought or question from anyone?
I just have a comment, Brother Shankara.
Yes.
It is that this that desires to bring all misery, which is very true. We want the world to be different. We want the world to be different the way it is. And the world has always been like this. If we look back 100 years, 200 years, even 5,000 years ago with all the Puranas, the world had evil, good, and all these things. But
yes, if we read the Mahabharata,
exactly.
it's all there.
We crave for different world. Even today it's happening that Mahabharata is going on all over the world. It's going on, not just in this country or India. It's everywhere. There is some part of Mahabharata. So
Yes.
I think we desire for a different world most of the time. That desire is the one which brings us misery. That's what Vivekananda said that it is this that desires bring all misery, which is very true. Very true. That desire part, if we just take it as it is, I think through meditation, we become more intuitive about what the people around want, how the world is. We become more, we accept more. We accept the way it is. That kind of calmness after years of practice, it brings into us. I can see that. It's an experience.
And what happens to us? We
We-
begin to see the necessity. Thank you, Haima, for all of that. We begin to see the necessity
Yes,
to be oh so kind,
yes. We
to be
become
oh so kind to ourselves,
exactly. We become gentle, more.
and to be kind, and as you, I like the word that you just used, gentle with others.
And we're more understanding the world around us. We understand the world around us. We don't desire for a different world. That's the thing. That is the way it has always been. That reality sets into us.
And if I could add to that, Haima, the Holy Mother, as I recall, said we will achieve liberation the moment we attain complete desirelessness. Is that?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, she said that. Thank you, Brahmadas. What she said was to one of her disciples who said, "Mother, I've been practicing. You gave me initiation. I've been practicing," and she mentioned only 2 years, and I haven't achieved realization. And Mother said, "Oh, well, it's so easy, dear. It's just so easy. The moment you stop wanting anything, it will all be over in that instant. The moment you stop wanting anything."
Yes. Very
So there it is. And but has that happened here? No, it has not. I assume it hasn't happened for any of the other faces on the screen either.
No,
Is
it
that
is
bad
not.
and wrong?
It takes.
No, it's not bad. It's not bad and wrong. It's simply
We're on
the place that we are.
the path.
So when we're struggling with these thousands of desires we have, how do you deal with that?
Well, Swami Prabhupada said, just recognize that they're nothing more than a restlessness of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
The mind is being made restless by the brush of the gunas against your mental impressions. And so that generates itself as there's something wrong in this moment. And as someone pointed out, I forget whether it was Haima or Swayam, someone pointed out very early on that we're always in the past or in the future. I think it was Swayam that said one way or the other, our thoughts are always in the past or in the future. They're not in the present moment. Well, that's the purpose of spiritual practice,
Yes.
is to bring us into the present moment. And we find as we do that spiritual practice and are more and more skilled at being in the present moment, we find it is full of love, joy, and bliss. But it's covered up by all of this restlessness of the mind because we identify with that. We think that is the reality, all this restless desire and thought of the mind, that's reality. That's not reality. That's just the gunas attaching themselves to gunas, as Krishna says so clearly in chapter 2 of the Gita. Maybe it's chapter 3. In any event, right there. It's nothing more than the gunas attaching themselves to gunas. So as we sink below that, which is what we do when we practice prayer, contemplation, concentration, meditation, manana, call it what you will. We sink below that. It isn't that the gunas don't, the gunas stop doing what they're doing. No, they do. They keep on keeping on. All that's still there. I've used the metaphor of sitting at the bottom of a swimming pool. At the bottom of a swimming pool, it's very calm and very quiet. If you look up, you see all the other people who are not at the bottom of the pool. They're at the surface of the pool, and they're splashing and playing and carrying on. You, as you practice spiritual, as you do your spiritual practices, you sink below that splashing and carrying on, part of which is this endless procession of desires that are just simply the stimulation of your old samskaras by the action of the gunas.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
as householders, of course, we have to practice more, or I know not have to, but we are encouraged to practice more mental renunciation.
Mm-hmm.
But if circumstances permit, I think, and Sri Ramakrishna also encourages that, sometimes it's necessary to actually leave, leave the world, to do more shravana, manana. It's very difficult to do quantitatively as much as.
Well, you're absolutely right, dear. And here's how Swami Prabhavananda told us to think about that issue. He said, the reason you're here, he said, speaking to the people who were sitting around him, the reason you're here is that you have discovered the shining light in the East, the light of truth. You call it what you will, God, truth. You've discovered the shining light in the East. Now you're living in the West, the land of death and rebirth, and everything that's associated with that. He said, just focus your attention on the light in the East and why it's drawing you. Why is it attracting you? What is it about it that is drawing you? You automatically leave behind the things of the West. He says you automatically and spontaneously leave them behind. Yes, they will be sticky sometimes and try to hold on to you, but if you focus your attention, that's why the talk, what deserves your attention? That shining light in the East, and whatever form it takes for you, is what deserves your attention. And so you move that direction and spontaneously you leave behind. And so some of it is a physical leaving behind, some of it is a mental leaving behind. Thank you, Swayam. You're right. Sometimes we have to actually physically leave things behind. But it's like Swami Vivekananda said, only a fool gives up something until he knows he's giving it up for something better. We're giving up. We come to really understand as spiritual aspirants that we're giving up the lesser for the higher, that which is less fulfilling and less fun for that which is more fulfilling and more fun, which is why I encourage everyone to read the testimony of the saints as represented in many books, but the one I point to is Love Poems from God, because you can see that they're just having a hell of a lot of fun. They're enjoying the heck out of being embodied. And the reason is that they've freed themselves from that which is not so much fun. Doesn't mean they never have a misery. If you study their lives, you'll see that, these things are sometimes very difficult for them. But they don't identify with that at all. Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Brother Shankar.
Anything else? Okay. We'll leave it at that. May there be peace in outer space. Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters. Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees. May the gods be peaceful. May the whole universe be pervaded by peace. Let that infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. Go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as a mother and father, looking over us as a mother and father, sustaining and nourishing us as a mother and father. That's what's meant by the loving and protective embrace. Any final thought from anyone? Okay, dears. Well, that's it until Saturday. Saturday, of course, we'll take up Swami Prabhavananda's book, Realizing God, and we're partway through his talk on mind and its control, which is, given our discussion this evening, you can see why it might be useful to learn that. So that's from 11 to 12 or thereabouts on Saturday. And then I encourage you all to be part of our annual meeting of the congregation, which will take place on Zoom again, unfortunately, this year, but it's necessary, at 11 a.m. this coming Sunday. Just click on the Zoom link and you will hear reports from the trustees, from committee chairs. It's not boring. Everybody makes a real attempt not to have it be boring, but tell you stuff that's interesting about how the center actually operates. And then there'll be a report from me as well. And then you will be able to help elect next year's Board of Trustees. So I hope you'll all come on Sunday. And that's it for now.
Thank you.
Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Happy trails to you.